On the morning of October 31st, 2010, in the quiet rural town of Martin, Ohio, 16-year-old Devin Griffin was looking forward to a simple Sunday. It was Halloween, and after a weekend at his dad's, he was heading to his mother's house to change for church. The house sat on 100 acres of peaceful land, a place for gardening, hunting, and family. But what awaited him inside was not a holiday prank. It was a scene of unimaginable horror that would forever shatter the illusion of safety and reveal a monster lurking within the family's own walls. The morning of Sunday, October 31, 2010, felt like any other in Martin, Ohio. Griffin had spent the weekend at his father's house, and his plan for the day was simple and routine. It was Halloween, and after a night of parties he hadn't even attended, he was heading back to his mother's house to change his clothes and get ready for church. The family home sat on a vast 100-acre property, a place that had always represented stability and safety. When he arrived around 9:30 a.m., the house was quiet, but he didn't think much of it. He went inside, and his focus was on his immediate task, changing and leaving. It was during this brief window that he had a strange interaction with his 24-year-old stepbrother, William Lisk Jr., whom everyone called BJ. BJ was acting completely out of character. His normal demeanor was described by Devin as slow, dark, and gloomy, a person who kept to himself. But that morning, BJ was unexpectedly upbeat and chatty. He engaged Devin in a conversation, asking pointed questions about where he was going and, more importantly, how long he would be gone. Devin, likely preoccupied with his own plans, didn't dwell on it. He was in the house for only about 5 minutes before he left again, heading out to church, completely unaware that he was leaving a scene of unimaginable horror behind him. The church service that morning ran longer than usual, and it wasn't until the afternoon that Devin finally returned home. He walked back into the house and his mind was on relaxation. He made a beeline for his room, eager to play video games and unwind. It was around 1:30 in the afternoon when he finally paused, the controller in his hand, and noticed the profound and eerie silence that had settled over the house. This wasn't the normal quiet of a lazy Sunday. This was different. This was an absence of sound that felt heavy and wrong. His mother, Susan, was a known early riser. She wasn't someone who slept in, especially not this late into the day. A knot of concern must have tightened in his stomach. Something was off. The happy, familiar house now felt alien and threatening. Putting his game on pause, he decided he had to investigate. He got up and left his room. He headed downstairs, moving in the direction of his mother and stepfather's bedroom. As he approached their open doorway, his eyes took in a sight that was both ordinary and instantly alarming. His mom and stepdad were still in bed, lying down with their maroon comforter pulled all the way up, covering their heads. Only his mother's foot was visible, sticking out from the bottom of the blankets. The scene was strange enough to push his concern into full-blown alarm. He moved closer, approaching his mother's side of the bed. He reached out and tapped her leg, speaking to her softly, trying to wake her. It was in that moment of intimate proximity that his world shattered. His eyes focused on the pillow, just beside where her head would be. It was saturated, soaked through with a dark, reddish-brown substance he recognized as blood. His brain, desperately trying to protect him from the truth, scrambled for a logical explanation. Could this be part of a prank? A twisted, gruesome joke? For one single fleeting second, he clung to that possibility. But as the seconds ticked by, the reality of what he was seeing, the sheer volume of blood, the unnatural stillness of the bodies under the blanket, crashed down upon him with the force of a physical blow. This was no joke. His mother and stepfather were dead. Panic, pure and absolute, took over. He fled from the room, from the house. His only thought was to get away. In his terror, it never even occurred to him to check on his older brother, Derek. He just ran. And from a place of safety, he called the one person he knew he could count on, his aunt. When the police arrived at the Lisk family's rural home, what they uncovered was a scene of profound violence that went far beyond the initial discovery. Devin's frantic call had brought them to the property, but it was the systematic search of the house that revealed the full, horrifying extent of the tragedy.
The officers first confirmed the deaths of Susan and William Lisk in their master bedroom, but the home was large, and as they moved through it, they came to a second bedroom where Derek Griffin, Susan's 23-year-old son, was found. He too was dead. 3 members of the family had been killed in their own home. The initial observations by the coroner at the scene pointed to a brutal and close-range attack. The cause of death for all 3 victims was obvious trauma to the head, but the specific methods differed, adding another layer of horror to the investigation. William Lisk, the retired Air Force veteran, had been shot. The examination would later reveal he was shot 5 times in the face and head, with the gun fired from a range of just 1 to 2 feet. He was found lying in what was described as a natural sleeping position, suggesting he never even had a chance to wake up and defend himself. His wife, Susan, was also shot at close range, 3 times. However, her body was found in a more awkward, sprawled position, leading investigators to suspect that she may have been moved after the attack. The investigation also uncovered that Susan had been sexually assaulted, a detail that deepened the depravity of the crime. Down the hall, the situation was different. Derek's bedroom door was found locked from the inside. This required the police to force their way in. Inside, they found Derek curled up in his bed, his back to the door, facing the wall. He had not been shot. His cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The coroner believed he likely died within just a few minutes of the first strike. The murder weapon for this attack was soon located within the house, a bloodied claw hammer, its condition consistent with the terrible wounds Derek had suffered. This hammer, along with the family's own guns which were seized, was sent to the state's crime lab for forensic testing. A critical detail noted by investigators was the lack of any real struggle. It appeared that all 3 victims were attacked as they slept, completely unaware of the danger that had entered their home. There were no overturned lamps, no scuff marks on the floor, nothing to indicate a fight for life. This pointed to a killer who moved with a chilling deliberateness, someone who knew the layout of the house and the routines of its inhabitants. The only potential clue to the shooter's identity was the missing .22 caliber handgun used on Susan and Bill. Muddy footprints on the back deck led investigators to suspect the killer had disposed of the weapon in the family's pond. They went to the immense effort of draining the pond and using weapon-sniffing dogs to search the mud, but the gun was never found. It had vanished, just like the family's white Ford F-150 pickup truck, which was noted as missing from the property. For Devin, the reality was now inescapable. In a matter of hours, his entire life had been flipped upside down. His mother, his brother, and his stepfather were gone, taken from him in the most violent way imaginable within the walls of their own home. The sanctuary of his childhood had been transformed into a gruesome crime scene, and the person responsible was almost certainly someone he knew. With the family's white Ford F-150 pickup truck missing and B.J. Lisk nowhere to be found, the investigation immediately had a clear direction and a prime suspect. Devin's account of B.J.'s unusually cheerful and inquisitive behavior that morning, coupled with his Aunt Lori's swift assertion to police about B.J.'s troubled history and past threats, created a compelling picture. The police now had to find B.J. before he could potentially disappear or harm anyone else. The break in the case came quickly, thanks to a logical deduction about where B.J. might go. Just 1 week earlier, B.J. and his father, Bill, had returned from a week-long deer hunting trip. They had stayed at the family's remote hunting cabin, located about 170 miles away in Carroll County. It was a place B.J. knew well and would likely see as a refuge. Police units were dispatched to the area. Deputy Michael Balash was one of the officers involved in the search, and it was he who spotted the white Ford F-150 pickup truck parked near the cabin, matching the description of the missing vehicle. Deputy Balash did not rush in immediately. He wisely monitored the property, waiting for backup and observing the situation. It wasn't long before he saw movement. B.J. Lisk exited the cabin and stood on the porch. He leaned against a post, lit a cigarette, and smoked. With his target in sight, Deputy Balash moved in, approaching with his gun drawn for his own safety and calling for immediate backup. B.J. was arrested there on the porch without further incident and was taken into custody, but the investigation at the cabin was just beginning. A search of the interior revealed a telling piece of evidence: an uneaten Subway sandwich. This wasn't just a random detail, it provided a clear timeline. Investigators were able to obtain security footage from a Subway restaurant located near the cabin. The footage confirmed that BJ had purchased that sandwich less than an hour before his arrest. He had stopped for a meal, seemingly without a care in the world, while his family lay dead back in Martin. The cabin itself, the truck, and the clothing BJ was wearing were all meticulously collected and taken into evidence by the Carroll County Sheriff's Department and the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation. These items would be crucial for forensic testing, potentially linking BJ directly to the crime scene. Initially, the prosecutors charged BJ with just one count of murder. This was a strategic legal move. They had enough evidence for that single charge to hold him in jail without bond, while they continued to build their case for the other two murders and any additional charges. Even in custody, BJ displayed a volatile nature. As he was being processed and transferred from a holding cell to a receiving cell, he was instructed to put on a suicide prevention smock, a standard procedure for inmates deemed a risk to themselves. BJ refused. When an officer, identified as Lamont, directed him toward the smock and touched his shirt, he reacted violently. He punched and scratched Officer Lamont in the face. Despite this assault on a law enforcement officer, no additional charges were filed from this incident at that time. It took the threat of a stun gun from another arriving officer to finally make BJ comply and put on the smock.
The violent outburst in the jail was not a new development. It was the latest chapter in a long and well-documented history of conflict and mental health struggles that made B.J. Lisk a known entity to local law enforcement. For years, the peace of the Lisk household and the surrounding neighborhood had been repeatedly shattered by BJ's escalating behavior. The problems began early. Back in 2002, when BJ was just 16 years old and already on house arrest for a previous offense, he threatened to harm himself. When officers arrived at the home to perform a welfare check, he attacked them, resulting in assault charges being filed in juvenile court. The situation did not improve as he grew older. In 2004, his aggression turned directly toward his stepmother, Susan. During one argument, he forcefully struck her in the chest. 2 months later, the situation escalated dangerously when he struck Susan in the head with a coffee cup and then stole her car. This was a severe enough incident that Susan was forced to file a felonious assault charge against him. However, the judicial system struggled to handle BJ. The assault and robbery charges from this event were eventually dropped after he was deemed incompetent to stand trial. The root of the household tension often traced back to when Bill and Susan married in 2001. Susan had attempted to establish normal household rules and expectations for the teenager, but BJ was having none of it. His relationship with his stepmother was continuously strained, and his behavior worsened significantly following his parents' divorce, leading him to skip school and act out. After the murders, even more disturbing stories from family friends came to light. There was one instance where William was forced to kick his then 18-year-old son out of the house after BJ attacked Susan while she was in the shower. Despite this relentless cycle of violence and turmoil, Bill's love for his son never wavered. In a testament to his desperate hope, William even filed for guardianship of BJ in 2006, seeking to maintain legal control to continue getting him help. By 2007, BJ's mental health had deteriorated to the point where he was formally hospitalized and diagnosed with bipolar schizoaffective disorder. He was eventually transferred to a structured group home for mental health patients called Sandusky. But even this supervised environment could not contain his behavior. Bill's primary goal was always to get BJ the consistent help he so clearly needed. He knew that when BJ was compliant with taking his prescribed medication, he could function and do well. The tragic pattern was that after a period of stability, BJ would decide he no longer needed the medication and would stop taking it. He would then replace it with drinking and smoking pot,
inevitably leading to a rapid decline and another crisis. This was the volatile and heartbreaking reality that the Lisk family had been living with for years, a constant cycle of hope, fear, and violence that ultimately ended in the most devastating way imaginable. The day before the murders was a happy one, a final, normal memory for the Lisk family. On Saturday, October 30th, Bill and BJ returned home from their week-long hunting trip at the cabin in Carroll County. It was a trip that had ended just 24 hours before the unthinkable happened. That evening, the family home was filled with the sounds of a Halloween party. A family friend, Mark Gradle, was there and later recalled that the atmosphere was light and cheerful. Everyone seemed to be happy and having a good time, a brief respite from the usual tension that BJ's presence often brought. Gradle noted that he didn't see Susan's son Derek at the party, but he said this was unusual. Derek and BJ did not get along, and Derek had a habit of making himself scarce whenever BJ was around, likely to avoid any potential confrontation. As the party continued into the night, Susan and William enjoyed alcoholic beverages with their guests. This led to a critical decision, one that would have fatal consequences. It was rare for BJ to be allowed to spend the night at the Lisk house. His primary residence was the Sandusky Group Home, a structured environment for mental health patients. The normal protocol would have been for someone to drive him back there once the party was over. However, because Susan and William had been drinking, they decided it was safer to make an exception. Rather than risk driving under the influence late at night, they allowed BJ to stay. They made up a sofa bed for him in the living room. When investigators later processed the crime scene, they specifically noted a made-up sofa bed, the physical evidence of that fateful decision. The timeline of the murders themselves remains partially shrouded, but a key piece of evidence came from Michelle Gradle, Mark's wife. She told investigators that she heard what sounded like gunshots at 6:30 in the morning on Sunday, October 31st. If her account is accurate, it paints a chilling picture of the morning's events. It would mean the murders occurred in the early morning darkness, before Devin ever returned home from his father's house. It means that when Devin came home at 9:30 to change for church, he was walking into a house where his mother, stepfather, and brother were already dead. His brief, strange conversation with an upbeat BJ who asked him where he was going and how long he would be gone took place just feet from their bodies. In this scenario, BJ knowingly allowed Devin to leave the house and live, sparing his stepbrother for reasons known only to him. The alternative possibility is that the timeline is slightly off and the murders happened after Devin left for church around 9:35 a.m. Phone records show that Derek's last communication with anyone was at 2:02 p.m. the previous day, October 30th, which doesn't help narrow down the time of death. Regardless of the exact hour, the sequence of events reveals a cold and calculated mindset.
In the wake of the murders, the legal machinery began to turn, moving deliberately to build a case against William B.J. Lisk, Jr. By November of 2010, a grand jury had returned a formal indictment, charging B.J. with 6 counts of aggravated murder. It was 2 counts for each of the 3 people killed. The charges were carefully constructed to reflect the specific nature of the crimes. 3 of the counts were for murder with prior calculation and design, a legal term indicating the killings were planned and not a spontaneous act of passion. The other 3 counts were for murder committed during the commission of another felony, specifically aggravated robbery. This suggested the prosecution believed the theft of the truck or other property was part of the criminal act. To these charges, B.J. Lisk entered a plea of not guilty, setting the stage for what was expected to be a long and painful trial for the surviving family members and friends. However, a major legal question had to be answered first. Was B.J. mentally fit to participate in his own defense? Given his long history of mental health issues, including his diagnosis of bipolar schizoaffective disorder and past rulings of incompetency, this was a critical step. The court ordered not 1 but 2 separate competency evaluations to be conducted by mental health professionals. He was deemed competent to stand trial. This meant the legal process could move forward and the state could seek the death penalty for his crimes. As the pre-trial hearings continued through 2011, the reality of the evidence against him must have become undeniable. Then, on August 12, 2011,
In a move that avoided a public trial, BJ stood before the court and changed his plea. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder. This was a strategic negotiation between the defense and the prosecution. In exchange for his guilty plea, the state agreed to remove the death penalty as a possible sentence. This ensured that BJ would spend the rest of his life in prison, but the state would not seek his execution. For the families of the victims, this likely brought a complex mix of relief and frustration. Relief that they would be spared the ordeal of a graphic trial, but frustration that he would not face the maximum penalty. Before the judge formally sentenced him, BJ was given the opportunity to speak. He offered an apology for murdering his family, but then immediately shifted the blame away from himself. He attributed his actions to Satan and to his mental illness, refusing to take full, unambiguous responsibility for the conscious choices he made that Halloween morning. This statement provided little solace, echoing the same pattern of deflection and lack of accountability that had characterized his troubled life. The plea deal ensured a life behind bars, closing the criminal case, but leaving a permanent void in the lives of those who knew and loved the victims.
The final act of the legal process was the sentencing hearing, which took place in September of 2011. The outcome was 3 consecutive life sentences in prison without the possibility of parole. Following the sentencing, BJ was transferred into the custody of the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction to begin serving his time. He was initially housed at the Ross Correctional Institution, a multi-level security prison in Chillicothe, Ohio. For nearly 4 years, BJ Lisk remained incarcerated at Ross. His existence there was a silent, behind-bars chapter, largely hidden from public view. Then on March 31st, 2015, that chapter came to an abrupt end. Correctional officers found BJ Lisk dead in his cell. The official cause of death was ruled a suicide, the result of a self-inflicted wound. His death closed the book on the criminal case, but it also left a complex and painful legacy. For some, it may have felt like a final escape from earthly justice. For others, it was just another layer of tragedy in a story already overflowing with it. The story of the Lisk family murders leaves behind a painful and complex legacy, one that extends far beyond the courtroom and the prison cell. For Devin Griffin, the sole surviving son who discovered the horror, the trauma of that Halloween morning is a burden he will carry for a lifetime. The family home on 100 acres, once a place of gardening, hunting, and laughter, stands as a silent monument to a shattered family. For the extended family and friends like Lori Mose and Mark and Michelle Grandel, the loss is multifaceted. They not only grieve for Susan, Bill, and Derek, but they also live with the knowledge of the many warning signs that preceded the tragedy. Bill Lisk's unwavering, almost desperate hope for his son is one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this story. This case forces a difficult conversation about the intersection of mental illness, violence, and the limits of family intervention. The legacy of this case is not one of neat resolution, but of enduring sorrow and difficult lessons. It is a story about the devastating cost of domestic violence and untreated mental illness. The memories of Susan's big heart, Bill's loyalty, and Derek's sailboat on Lake Erie are what remain, precious and fragile against the backdrop of an unthinkable crime. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true crime stories that matter. Until next time, stay safe.